And today we celebrate in one sense and mourn in one sense, because today is the last day of our series called Sacred Romance. We've been working paragraph by paragraph through the Song of Solomon. From what I understand, that's been a great thing and an eye-opening thing, to say the least, from some of you guys. There's at least one set of twins that's come out of this series, so we're thankful for that. And on that note, let me say a couple things about the book. If you haven't been here, just to bring you up to speed. First of all, this book is largely ignored in the church because it is in-your-face, blatant, honest-to-goodness. If it looks like sex, it's sex in the Bible. And a lot of people, they're Christians, and they don't know how to handle that. And so they just kind of leave it to the side. When it is picked up in the church a lot of times, I think it's misinterpreted for that same reason. Because people will take what's called an allegorical approach. And they'll look at the text and they'll say, well, that can't be really what God intended. And they'll allow their own fallenness to stand above the Scriptures and say, well, it must just point to God's love for Israel or Christ's love for the church. And we see those pointers and we point them out. But we believe the best approach to this book is to take a literal interpretation first. To see all the truth that's there for us, both as singles and as marrieds, to look at how it points to our sexuality and how we can cultivate both the intimate and the non-intimate sides of our marriage together. And then, from that foundation, point to the other meaning. So that's the approach that we take here. Here's another thing you need to know. The kind of literature that this is different than what we're used to in North America. This is ancient Near Eastern wisdom literature. So it's told almost like a photo album, that this couple is reflecting upon their marriage, and they're going through and they're looking at pictures, and they say, oh, I remember this when we were courting, and then we got married, and this was our honeymoon. And especially in the text that we'll see today as we work through the entirety of chapter 8, you see some of that. You see the Shulamite girl, who's Solomon's wife, go all the way back to the time even before they got married and reflect upon some things. So it's a little bit sometimes difficult to follow. The Hebrew here is difficult to understand. But by God's grace, He's given us a Spirit to guide us into all truth. And there's a lot of truth to be seen here today. So take out your listening guide or watch on the screen, and let's hear the word from Song of Songs, chapter 8, 1 through 14.
Oh, that you were like a brother to me, who nursed at my mother's breast. If I found you outside, I would kiss you, and none would despise me. I would lead you and bring you into the house of my mother, she who used to teach me. I would give you spiced wine to drink, the juice of my pomegranate. His left hand is under my head, and his right hand embraces me. I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, that you not stir up or awaken love until it pleases. Who is that coming up from the wilderness, leaning on her beloved? Under the apple tree I awakened you. There your mother was in labor with you. There she who bore you was in labor. Set me as a seal upon your heart, as a seal upon your arm. For love is strong as death. Jealousy is fierce as the grave. Its flashes are flashes of fire, the very flame of the Lord. Many waters cannot quench love, neither can floods drown it. If a man offered for love all the wealth of his house, he would be utterly despised. We have a little sister, and she has no breasts. What shall we do for our sister on the day when she is spoken for? If she is a wall, we will build on her a battlement of silver. But if she is a door, we will enclose her with boards of cedar. I was a wall, and my breasts were like towers, when I was in his eyes as one who finds peace. Solomon had a vineyard at Baal-Hamon. He let out the vineyard to the keepers. Each one was to bring for its fruit 1,000 pieces of silver. My vineyard, my very own, is before me. You, O Solomon, may have the 1,000, and the keepers of the fruit 200. O you who dwell in the gardens, with companions listening for your voice, let me hear it. Make haste, my beloved, and be like a gazelle or a young stag on the mountains of spices.
All right, thanks, sister. Well, we got 14 verses today. Let me set the scene for you, and then we'll get to work. Where we left off 2 weeks ago, we saw this couple fight, and we saw them patch it up. Married people, you guys know, the best part of fighting is what? It's patching it up. So we see kind of the second half, potentially, of the patching up here together. So let's read verse 1. Oh, that you were like a brother to me, who nursed at my mother's breasts. If I found you outside, I would kiss you, and none would despise me. Let me help you guys out here a little bit, because we look at this and we're like, okay, we're definitely in eastern Kentucky. There is a man telling me to squeal like a pig, and there's banjo music in the background. I'm disturbed about what's happening here in verse 1. Well, not at all. This is a cultural comment, kind of like what we saw with the flock of goats. that what is happening here is the culture that they are in doesn't allow for the public display of affection of any kind between a husband and a wife. Now we know even today, and there should be standards in place. You shouldn't be rubbing on each other out in public. That's just gross. Don't do that. But it's okay to hold hands or to put an arm around or to put an arm around the side or to kiss each other from now on. But in this culture, it wasn't. And the only people that could do that would be a brother and a sister. And so what she's saying here is, sweetheart, I've got the hots for you so much that the cultural constraints upon us, they're constricting my love. And I want to be able to show it. So I wish you were like my brother so that I could give you a good kiss right on the mouth. That's what she's saying. So what's the principle for us here? It's that our love should be expressive. You know, I think this is something that we need to think about, even though we kind of know this intuitively. Because once life gets going, and most of us here are extremely busy people, you tend to take things for granted. And wives typically go, well, I cook for my husband, I keep the house clean, I take care of the kids. He knows that I love him. And husbands, on the other hand, will do the same thing. I work hard, I stay late, I make overtime so we can take a decent vacation. And I know that she loves me. But here's what typically happens. Roses that are never given are almost worthless. You guys may remember, this is probably when we were growing up, but there was a song by a group called Mike and the Mechanics. It was called The Living Years. And it was this whole pay-in of how this guy gets to the end of his father's life and dies, and he wishes that he'd been able to say all these things to him while he was still alive. But now that he's gone, it's too late. Well, I think there's a principle there that applies even for our marriages. That if we feel something toward our spouse, which should be love, then we need to express that. Another way to think of it is maybe this picture right here. I don't know if you guys have ever been around an old couple that's just still really in love. It's really funny sometimes. You walk, especially downtown, you see these folks, and there's some little woman, and she's usually walking pretty good, and then there's some old man, and he's like all stumped over, and he's got his pants pulled up like he's waiting for a flood, and up over his belly, he's got on a tie that's like 3 inches long, and he's just kind of having him lead her, and she's just like walking along like this lady, telling jokes and talking about the good old days, and he's just kind of grunting and making sounds. Well, that's coming for all of us, by the way, just if you didn't know that. So live it up now, because your slump's coming. And your wife's going to laugh at you and tell jokes about the old days. Well, one thing that's beautiful about that is to see that love that's being expressed. And to see that couple that's still old, that wants to express their love for one another. Well, that's in essence what we see here with Solomon. Now, these people are young, but they have the seed form of what carries that love forward. So a good couple of questions I think we can ask ourselves here to apply is, are we in the habit of showing a healthy amount of affection to one another, even in public? And if not, why not? Because a lot of times the reason why men and women don't show affection to each other is because there's some deep-seated, rooted issue that's causing resentment, that's causing that to die on the vine. So if you find that here in your marriage, that I never want to hug or embrace my wife or my husband out in public, I would encourage you to look deeper and listen to what the Spirit may have to say to you of why is my love not overflowing in this outward expression. Because what we see here, moving from verse 1 to verse 2, is that the reason she wants to express this love in such a way is because of what we see in verse 2. I would lead you and bring you into the house of my mother, she who used to teach me. I would give you spiced wine to drink, the juice of my pomegranate. And what she's saying here is some more of this figurative, erotic language, that she has a very passionate, a very unconsumable love for her husband. What she's saying here, again, needs a little bit of cultural explanation. You guys remember, who've been on this journey already, that there's a time when she actually refers to wanting to take Solomon back to her parents' house and potentially even make love in their bedroom. And we looked at that and we said, that's kind of weird. We don't want to do that. But to understand what she's saying here is that she was very close to her family and that their marriage was a symbol for her of fertility. It was also a symbol of stability. And she's saying, I want the same things that they had in their marriage in my marriage. And what we see put feet on that right here in verse 2 is that her mother was who instructed her about sexuality. That's what she's saying there. She who used to teach me. So what's the principle for us today? Well, I think it's that the primary place for sexual instruction should be the home. You guys remember a few decades ago, maybe when some of us were growing up, when the whole "do we educate children in sexuality in public school" debate began. And then you had this whole thing of, are we going to have the gym teacher having to put the condom on the cucumber? And are we going to have the gym teacher trying to draw the woman's organs and it looks like the head of a cow? And we had all these different debates and discussions about this. And the reason why that even took place in the first place is because parents advocated their biblical responsibility to teach their kids about sex at home. So had parents done what they should have done, all of those other questions and humor and giggling and thoughts would have never taken place, because the school wouldn't have had to step in and do what mom and dad should have done at home. And what she is saying here is, the way that this is to be is that my mother is talking, and now Solomon, that I've left them and I've cleaved to you. Now I want you to teach me about sexuality. We know here this woman has saved herself for marriage. We know that's God's ultimate design. And she wants to learn with her new husband about sex. So I think a couple of practical questions that we can ask ourselves here is, are we currently cultivating an environment of openness and honesty in our home? Because most of us here, our kids are pretty small. And our kids are not ready to learn about sexuality. But what they are ready to see is parents who can openly dialogue about anything with one another and with them in such a way that it constructs an environment so that when the sex talk comes, when they reach pre-puberty or puberty, then it doesn't come out of nowhere. And that there's an environment created where people talk about things of substance. Parents, as your kids are small, are you cultivating that kind of environment? Those who are here who don't have kids yet, are you thinking toward the kind of environment and the kind of intellectual and spiritual oxygen that your children are going to grow up breathing? Because that's a practical thing that we can do now to prepare us for the day when that comes, to be able to speak to that. Another good question that we can ask ourselves is this: are we praying for our children to come to us with their questions? Fact is, most people in America learn about sex from one of three places: MTV, their friends in the locker room, or the wall of a Speedway gas station that's near their bus stop. That's typically when people receive sexual instruction. But I'm praying that my kids would come to us. They hear about something on the playground that they don't understand, they should come to me and ask that. They shouldn't have to do a Google search in the 7th grade to figure that out. They should be able to come to their mom and their dad or someone else in their church community and be able to ask them questions that they have answers for, because there's already an environment of intimacy and a cultivated openness and awareness to be able to speak to them. It's a good way, I think, we can apply what we see that the Shulamite girl is saying here to Solomon. Then here at the end of verse 2, as I referred to it already, I think you see more erotic imagery. It's unclear exactly what the pomegranate is to be, the spiced wine, but if you've listened to the previous messages, you know it's something good. All right, let's look at verse 3 together. His left hand is under my head, his right hand embraces me. What is this? That's the sexual position. Verse 4, I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, that you do not stir up or awaken love until it pleases. This is the third time that we've seen this theme, this clear warning throughout this book. And we've talked about this before. Any good teacher, they want their students to understand something. And that's the way this book comes to us, as wisdom literature. They say it, and they say it, and they say it again. And so what the writer is communicating to us here, under the inspiration of the Spirit, is that sex that pleases God takes place within the context of marriage. That's what they're trying to communicate to their friends here. That there is a time and there is a season for all things, just like Ecclesiastes 3:10 says. And the time and season for sexual expression is within the context of marriage. You guys remember this picture from before, that I believe sexuality in marriage should be like fire in a fireplace. That when it is rightly stoked, when it's within the right confines, it can give light and heat to the entirety of your home. But if it's pursued outside of those bounds, through pornography or through alternative lifestyles or through premarital engagement in sexual activity, what's going to happen? It can burn down your entire life. And if there's sexual dysfunction in your marriage, it can consume your home. Some people can hear this and say, man, he just talks a lot about why sex is so important. Well, the reason is because if there's a problem in that area, if she's withholding or he's aggravating her all the time, and there's no bringing together of that. I think it's a symptom of a larger problem in their marriage. And we must deal with it. Because sex that pleases God takes place within the context of marriage, and it takes place rightly within that context. Another good application question I think you can ask yourself is this. If you're here and you're single, am I saving myself for that proper context? Now, I know that I'm not under any illusion that I'm talking to a bunch of single people who are here who are virgins. The world is wicked, the temptation is strong, and we're fallible, fallen people that make serious mistakes. And if you've not ever dealt with that, you've not owned the shame and the guilt, and then have it applied to Christ, and then received and walk in His forgiveness for that sexual sin, today you need to do that. Because if you're here and you're a Christian, and you still got that stuff hanging over your head, and the past is coming into the present that's going to affect your future, then an enemy is gaining ground in your life. Because you're carrying this albatross around your neck that the gospel says that you don't have to carry. And today, we need to deal with that head on. If you're here and you're still on a journey, maybe you got some questions about God, you don't know that Christ has paid for your sins and you're not seeing that working out in your life, perhaps even the sexual sin that you've been involved in, God might use that to point to the deeper sin in your life and say, this is just a rotten branch on top of a rotten tree that has rotten roots, and that you need Christ in your life. Today, as we journey through this text and we look at these principles and we see how we fall short, allow that to point you to the need for Christ in your life, no matter what the situation in your spiritual journey. Let me throw out one more other thing here. If you find yourself too deep in a hole to get out on your own, let's say you're addicted to porn. Let's say you're immersed in an alternative lifestyle that nobody even knows about. This is a church that will walk with you through both of those. This is a church that will come to you and say, hey, we can't condone your sin because the Scriptures don't do that, but Christ has forgiveness for you. And He has called us together to walk out of darkness into light. And we will journey with you. There's been at least one person in this series who's caught me and who said, hey, you know what? I can relate to what you're saying. Can you pair me up with somebody so that they can start walking with me? And that's what's going to happen in that individual's life. So if you're here and you find yourself, I'm in this hole, I can't get out, then grab one of us after the service or somebody in your community group and let's work on this together. Now let's look back at the text here in verse 5. I'll just go ahead and tell you, this is a difficult to interpret verse. You pick up 5 commentaries, you're going to find like 12 interpretations. Nobody's exactly sure what's happening here. Who is that coming up from the wilderness, leaning on her beloved? Under the apple tree I awakened you. There your mother was in labor with you. There she bore you who was in labor. Some people think that they've gone out on a date. They're coming back. They're in their chariot. They're talking to one another. Other people have different ideas. I don't really know what to make of it, so we'll just leave it there before I misinterpret it. But then looking on at the rest part of the verse, it's kind of the same thing. What we do know for sure is that the apple tree in this culture was kind of an ancient aphrodisiac. Anytime that it's mentioned, she's saying, I awakened or I aroused you. I brought you to life sexually. And this last part here about the mother in labor, I have no idea what this means. So I'll just be honest with you as your pastor. I think the best stab that we can take is that she might be equating pain from childbirth to pain and love. I'm not sure about that. But what we can see here is a progression, I believe, of their relationship that leads up to kind of the payoff that begins to be unfolded here in verse 6. Set me as a seal upon your heart, as a seal upon your arm. And then look at this. Here's why. For love is strong as death. Jealousy is fierce as the grave. Its flashes are flashes of fire, the very flame of the Lord. Let's talk about this seal here. Another thing that we got to understand from this culture. Some of you guys have seen some movies, even from a little bit later in history, that a king or a head of a household had a big ring. And what they would do is they would use this ring to seal official documents and to say, whoever carries this has all the rights and privileges, and they speak for me. And they would take this ring, and they would take a big thing of wax, and they would get both of them hot, and they'd put the ring in there, and they'd stamp it, and then they'd stamp it on the document, and a lot of times they would seal it together. Well, what she is saying here is, I want you to wear my seal, and I want to be the seal upon your arm. That I want to be known, that I belong to Solomon, and that Solomon belongs to me. Next phrase here, that love is as strong as death. Death is the strongest force of nature that we can know. And I don't care how many vitamins you take, I don't care how many laps you do around the pool, you're going to die unless Jesus comes back and takes us away. And what she's saying here is my love and my passion and my commitment and my faithfulness is so strong for this man that it's like death. What else does she say? She says that jealousy is as fierce as the grave. So this is a Hebrew parallelism we think here, that she is equating the kind of love that she has as a jealous love. And her jealous love is as strong as death. And so what she's communicating here is that she loves this man with a jealous love. And she is looking at him not in some kind of sick way, but she's saying, I don't want any of the other girls to be around this guy. My love for him is jealous. It's the same kind of language we see in the Old Testament, where God refers to his own love for his people as a jealous love. And then the final phrase here, the flashes are flashes of fire, the very flame of the Lord. This is a serious hunka burning love we have right here. She's saying that my fire for him burns with the fire of God. Fellas, this is how we want our wives to speak about us. Wives, this is how we should want our husbands to speak about us. That our fire for one another is as strong as the fire of God. I think that leads us to two principles here. The first one is that marriage is intended to be permanent. And I know if you've been around the Scriptures, you know this. But this is an important word for us to hear in a culture that believes marriage is disposable. Because you see so many people go in with prenuptial agreements, and they have almost a contract, not a covenant, that says if you don't hold up your end of the deal, well, I'm out. Or if I don't hold up my end of the deal, you're out. That is not a biblical understanding of marriage. What you see in this book and throughout the Scriptures is that marriage is intended to be permanent. Now, I know we live in a fallen world. In my own view, I think that there are some reasons that the marriage can be broken. But the ideal is that marriage is not to be broken. It's intended for permanence. And I think the question that we need to ask ourselves here is, do we have this kind of biblical view? This is a true story. I know of a church where one of the deacons gave the following piece of counsel to someone in their church. His son-in-law obviously married his daughter, and they started to have problems. And the son-in-law went and started to talk to him. And I don't know the whole story, and I don't know if there was a lot more that I didn't know. But this is what one of the leaders in that church said. He said, son, sometimes people just fall out of love. And they end up getting divorced. And that was a counsel coming from a leader in a church that I knew. And if that's how it's viewed inside the church, then what does it look like in the world? And it is a shame and a scandal that the divorce rate inside the church is as high or higher than what you see in the culture. And we need to understand that marriage in a biblical framework is intended to be what? It's intended to be permanent. And for you guys who are here who have extended and understand the pain of divorce in your own life, it is a wound that only God can heal. Time won't heal that wound on its own. And if you're here and you've gone through a divorce and you've not received the healing that you need for your soul and to be able to function again fully emotionally, then we beseech you to seek out some folks so that we can begin to pray and work you through the process to receive healing for you. If you're here and you're in a tough marriage and you're just kind of thinking, well, maybe, we could just get a divorce. You should never consider divorce until all other options have been explored. That is not God's intention. And some Christians are so cavalier about it, and they look at what some believe are exception cases in the Scriptures and say, well, if this happens, then I can do this. That's not at all how those Scriptures are being interpreted. Marriage is to be permanent. That's what the Shulamite girl is saying here, that love is as strong as death, and my jealousy for my husband is as strong as the grave. Second principle I think we need to see here is that we should be protective but not overly possessive of our mates. I remember seeing this a few years ago. I had the opportunity to go and do some work in Nashville. I recorded a CD in this guy's basement. And you guys who work out of the home, you know, when you work out of the house, man, it's really hard to kind of draw those lines of here I'm working and here I'm not working. Well, I was young and single and not married and stupid. And I remember we started early in the morning. We ate breakfast and we worked for like 16 hours in this guy's basement. And as the night was waxing on, his wife comes in and kind of knocks on the door and comes in and she says, you know, I know you guys are here doing this. I know how important your music is. But listen, I got to have my husband back. And I started thinking as my 19-year-old self, who does this woman think she is? This is my CD. And I came here and I'm paying him and he's going to sit there until I can't sing anymore. And that's what we're going to do. And now that I'm a little bit older, and a little bit balder, and a little bit wiser, I began to understand, man, that wife is just being wise. She's not being possessive. She's being protective. And she knows if she lets her workaholic husband sit there, that he's going to work until he falls over asleep at the controls, just like all the rest of us would, unless she intervenes. And so now what I saw at 19 as overbearing, I now see as great wisdom. And a couple of questions I think we need to ask ourselves here is this. If you're here and you're married, are you rightly protective, but not overly possessive, of your mate? And wives, I bet you're probably going to have to be the one that sounds the alarm. Because typically husbands are the ones that are working themselves into the ground. Every once in a while you'll find a shoe on the other foot. But typically the wives are the ones that have to intervene. Now, let's talk to this other concept here that's in parentheses. Because I think there is a balance that's got to be made. I do know marriages, both on the female side and both on the male side, where there's too much possessiveness taking place. I was in this theatrical production a long time ago, and I was just a high school kid, but I remember being marked by something that I saw. There was one lady who actually had one of the lead roles in this drama that I was in. And her husband was so possessive that every night when we had a rehearsal, he would come and he would sit in the second row. And he would watch. Because there were other men that were there. And he didn't trust his wife. And you could almost see the fear and the paranoia on her face. And I looked at that and I said, that cannot be God's design for marriage. What was even worse was these are two people who professed to be Christians, who had gone from being protective to being possessive. And it was completely unhealthy. And I think if there's that seed or that root of over-possessiveness in your marriage, you're in danger of seeing that marriage be squelched and see it die on the vine. I don't know if you guys remember the story of Mice and Men, but there's a scene in which one of the characters, he has this mouse, and he loves this mouse, and what does he do? He squeezes and he squeezes, and he kills the mouse. I think if we have too much possessiveness in our marriage, you can kill the mouse of your relationship. We've got to find that balance through the work of the Spirit within our lives to know, am I being protective or am I being possessive? Am I being protective enough? And if you don't know the answer, ask your spouse. And if you're not comfortable with their answer, ask the people in your community group. Because this is the kind of sin that other people see. You may think that it's just you. You may think that it's just affecting you and your spouse. But other people see it, just like I saw it as a high school kid in a drama production. And this is something that we've got to find this balance that she exhibits here in the text. She was protective, but not overly possessive. Look here at verse 7, because she continues to hammer on this idea. Many waters cannot quench love, neither can floods drown it. What's she saying here? She's saying the fire of marital love is intended to be inextinguishable. I don't know if you guys have ever seen this, but sometimes there's older couples that are not like the one I showed you. They're married in name only, and you see them, and they just kind of like bump through life. They live in the same house, they share the same address, but they do not share the same life. And that's just desperately sad, because God did not call us together to be married and become one flesh that functions as two people. And the fire of love naturally decays over time, just like your body decays. If you ignore your marriage, it will go away. So I pulled out several practical things here I want to spend just a little bit of time on that I think can help you to keep this fire burning brightly. And a lot of people, they think that, oh, I should do this, but if they don't do any of these things, that fire eventually will diminish and can possibly even go out. First thing I think that can help you is something called reverse engineering. Men, we got together last weekend. You guys who missed it, man, you missed it. But there's good news because the link to the MP3 that we listen to is online right here at this website, resources.crossinglouisville.com. The notes from our meeting is there. And we wanted to set our men's ministry off on the right foot by basically following this principle. That you need to look to the end of your process, whether it's your spirituality or it's your business, or in this case, your marriage, and you say, what do I want to be like in 50 years? What do I want to be like in 40, 20, 30, 10, whatever? And I want to start there, and then I want to put all my principles and process in place to get me from where I am to where I want to be. And I think you need to think about that as a marriage. You need to look and you need to say, I want to be one of those old couples with a short tie and the hunched over and the high water pants, but how do I get there? Because if you don't have a plan, you're not going to get there. You're going to be the couple in separate bedrooms with separate lives where he goes out to the garage and does his thing and she does her thing, and never the twain shall meet. But if you reverse engineer and say, here's what I want, now by God's grace, how am I going to get there? There's a better chance you're going to get there. So at some point this week, fellas, I think it would be helpful as you to take the spiritual lead in your home and say, sweetheart, we need about 30 minutes. We need to sit down, and I need to know what you need and what I need to get us to the point from where we are to where we want to be as a marriage. There's a good chance there's going to be some vacations in there. There's a good chance you're going to have to spend some money to get there. There's a good chance you're going to have to get a babysitter every once in a while so you guys can go out and not just work yourselves into the ground. And you got to pull it together now, because most of us are still young. And there's a whole lot of life and a whole lot of sin and a whole lot of trouble ahead of us that we can head off at the pass if we reverse engineer. Here's another thing. Talk about daily life. Especially you guys who are in seminary, Bible college, one of the greatest temptations you're going to have is to make everything so spiritual. The wife's going to talk to you about whatever she burned in the stove, and you're like, well, that reminds me of something Calvin did one time. And you begin this big exposition about how Luther threw his inkwell at the devil, and she does not care. She doesn't. You think she does, she doesn't. Being a little hyperbolic, but you understand my point. We got to be careful that we can be normal people and not just theological eggheads. Now, there's a place for that. And my counsel to you is, weave it into daily life and make it legitimate. But for all of us here, we got to understand that God wants every piece of our lives. Not just a few hours we spend in class, not just an hour or two we spend in community group and the time we spend here, but He wants the unbroken thread of His worship to weave through every piece of our lives. And so you need to talk about daily life, talk about your struggles, talk about your sins, talk about what you're learning in your daily devotional time. Talk about what she's learning in her time. And just talk. Because a lot of times what happens in the rat race is the rats get busy and the rats don't speak anymore. And as the hamster wheel turns, it begins to turn silently. And one of the things that we can do to keep the fire burning is to talk simply about daily life. Third thing I give you, fight clean. If you missed this, we spent a whole lot of time. I think I gave like 400,000 different things that you can do to fight clean, so you got to go download it and listen to it. But you got to understand how to conflict. Because conflict is one of those things that will pour water on your fire. Because what happens a lot of times is if a couple doesn't know how to conflict, that's not an isolated incident. But there's something over here that hasn't been resolved from 4 months ago. Then there's something over here that she just won't let go. And then there's this thing that he's burying. And they set up this minefield in their living room where nobody can get around because they don't know how to fight clean. If you're here in your marriage or even your relationships, even in your apartment, I think the principle still applies. If you can't bring conflict to a healthy resolution for both parties, that can extinguish the fire of your marriage over time. So go get that message, download it, and I think it'll be helpful to you. Here's another one. Be open to change. One of the rules that Laurie and I made early on in our marriage that helped us so much was to say, we will not say, that's just the way I am. You guys, you get into a discussion, there's something going on, he does this, she does this, and somebody goes, well, that's just the way I am. And if that continues to be said over and over, what that communicates, I think both theologically and practically, is that you don't believe that God can change you. And if you do believe that, then you don't want God to change you. Let me just give you a little pastoral newsflash here. The goal of the Christian life is change. It's not regression. It's not status quo. It's you becoming more like Jesus. And so what we try to do is say, hey, you know what? I know there's some things in my personality that I'm not going to change. But if I'm doing something that's really driving her bananas and I can change it, then I need to try it. The thing with me, one of the things I was talking about somebody about this in the hall that has really convicted me about this series, I've told you the story, is, man, I have got to pick up the bedroom. I've got to pick it up because to me, I'm like a t-shirt-aholic. I got t-shirts from high school that I still wear sometimes. And they got big holes in the neck. And I'm just like, man, I need to keep them. I need to keep them. They're my t-shirt. Well, sometimes there's like stacks of them in the floor. Now, to me, they're very important. But in one sense, they're just t-shirts. It's not that big a deal. But when I'm leaving my crap all around the house, especially in the bedroom, what does that communicate to my wife, who works hard to try to keep our house clean with the 3 little kids that we have that are pouring things all over the floor all the time? Well, it communicates, number one, that now she's got a 4th kid that she's got to care for, who's apparently got some weird attachments to high school t-shirts, so he might have mental problems on top of his clutteriness. But more importantly than that is that I don't prize our bedroom. That I'm not doing what I told you to do, to cultivate it as a place of intimacy. And you know what? That's something I can change. Will I ever stop being cluttery? No. I'll go ahead and tell you. But I can pick up my bedroom. What's that thing in your life? What's that thing in your life where you've just been like, that's just the way I am? That God is speaking to you even now and saying, you got to work on this or the fire is going to go out. Here's the last 3 real quick. Don't take each other for granted. You know, I think in marriage in some ways, this is a weird illustration. It's kind of like changing the oil in your car. I mean, your car will run for a while without you changing the oil, but someday you're going to get that. And then you're going to be sitting at the red light. And there's going to be some guy in a Mercedes behind you who's giving you the finger and yelling at you because you didn't change your oil in your car. It's the same thing with your marriage. If you ignore it, the fire will go out. Don't take each other for granted. Don't just assume that person is always going to be there. You've got to work at it. Last 2. Get some outside help. This is something I'll say to you again and again and again. Here at Crossing, we really believe in the idea that we see in Acts 2:42-47 of biblical community. Now, some churches like us in our generation, they take this to this weird extreme. We don't believe in any of that nonsense. But what we do believe is that God created us for community, and if Danny's got a problem, that's Ben's problem. And if I've got a problem, that's Nathan's problem. And we are one, and we're to work on our stuff together. And so if you're here and you'd say, man, you know what, I'm up to number 5, and I'm in big trouble because our fire is like going out, and I'm not a voice guy, and I don't have anything else to get it started again. Well, if that's where you're at, then today you need to grab somebody. Or maybe this week at group, just say, hey, man, you know, he was talking about that stuff, and there's like something going on. Like, I need some help. And the community groups that we have are extremely helpful for that. The accountability groups that we have are even more helpful for that. But you need somebody in your life that can keep watch on your marriage with you. Let me say this one final thing. Don't let your pride be the reason you get a divorce. Because I know so many Christians that are like, but I'm a good Christian, and I should know what to do. And I have all these verses on the permanence of marriage, and I should know what to do. But they ignore their marriage, they don't get help, and they get a divorce just like the world. And we cannot let that happen. God has given us community so that we can see this stuff fleshed out together. Final one right here, I already mentioned, so I won't spend time on it. But don't neglect your intimate life. Let me say what I've said to you the whole time. If there's a problem in the bedroom, it's going to lead to a problem in the living room and the kitchen. And if there's a problem in those parts of the house, it can lead to an affair outside the home. You've got to deal with this. All right, final principle here. Verse 7. If a man offered for love all the wealth of his house, he would be utterly despised. What are they saying to us? They're saying that money cannot buy love. You know, even the Beatles knew this. Can't buy me love. That's what they said. And if the Beatles know, then we should know as God's people. And some of us, I think, you know, this might not be a huge problem here, but let me just say it as clearly and as frankly as I can, because I want you to remember. Money can buy you porn, money can buy you a hooker, but money cannot buy you true love and intimacy. And some of us who are here, maybe even trying to work on our marriage, we've been trying to buy gifts because we don't want to say I'm sorry. and we're throwing money at a problem that needs gospel transformation. And if you're here and maybe you have been trying to deal with the conflict, but you've not been dealing with the heart and the root, then you've got to step in and you've got to deal with it. Because money can't buy you love. Now, let's look here at verses 8 and 9. Most of your Bibles say right here that it's the others who are speaking. I believe that's right. I think specifically the others, though, however, are her brothers. You guys remember the brothers from earlier in the book? They didn't make out so well. It's kind of like my brothers were mad at me. They made me work outside. That's why I'm insecure about my body. That's what we know from this girl about her brothers before. But here we see their stock go up just a little bit. Because look at what they say. We have a little sister who has no breasts. I believe that this is reflecting back. This is one of those snapshots to her pre-puberty. What shall we do for our sister on the day when she is spoken for? So what they're saying here is, we are looking out for our sister. And one day she's going to be spoken for. So until then, we want to put a plan in place to protect her purity. Look at verse 9. If she is a wall, then we will build on her a battlement of silver. But if she is a door, we will enclose her with boards of cedar. You know what they're saying here? They're speaking figuratively about this young girl who is their sister's sexuality. And they're saying if she is a wall, that when the boys start to come around, she can fend them off and say, not till we get married. Be like that Georgia Satellite sign. No huggy, no kissy until I get a wedding vow. If she can do that, then we're going to praise her and put shields on the outside of her with our praise verbally. It's what they did in this culture to shore up and decorate their wall that kept out the enemies. Then we're going to praise her and we're going to be about it. But if she is a door, what are they saying? If this girl lets men come and go, then we're going to have to do something. And look at that language. We're going to have to board this girl up. And we're going to have to board this girl up with good wood, because that's what cedar is. And they're saying if she can't take care of her own sexuality, then we're going to have to help her ourselves. You know what I think the principle for us is? It's that the responsibility falls on parents to maintain the purity of their children. Now let me unpack what I'm saying here, because these aren't her parents. Well, the reason this is not her parents is because her dad, we also know from earlier in the book, is for some reason not there. Most people believe that he died. And so the brothers have done right. They've stepped in, they've stepped up, they said, hey, we want to protect this girl who's our sister, and we're willing to do whatever it takes to protect her purity. You know, one way that we're trying to do this at the Neeleys, this is great. 2 weeks ago, we had the opportunity for the first time for me and my little 2-year-old Annalie to go out on a date. And we just get a little behind the music right here. Initially, I was like, yeah. Then I was like, oh no, because I don't know what 2-year-old girls like to do. And I don't know. I don't know Disney, and I sure don't like Barbie. And I'm like, what are we going to do? So we do what we always do. We go to Chick-fil-A, which she knows as the cow store, because of the big-headed cow. And we went to the drive-thru, and we got our nuggets and our hot ketchup. That's what my kids call ketchup packets. It's really bizarre. And we got our chocolate milk, which is cool, because when I was growing up, all they had was the death soda and water. But now you can get chocolate milk, which kind of cancels out all the, fried oil on the nuggets, I guess. And so we got that, and I said, what do you want to do? She said, I want ice cream. So we go over to the Homemade Pie and Ice Cream Kitchen out here in Springhurst. I highly recommend it. She's talked all week about ice cream. We get in there, and just like a 2-year-old, she gets a cupcake. I'm like, are you sure? Because we've been saving up to get this ice cream. No, I want the chocolate cupcake. So we get the chocolate cupcake. It's awesome. She carries it like she just won the lottery. We go over and we sit down at the little kids table, which is really funny because I'm good size sitting at the kids table. And I'm like, how y'all doing? That's right. I paid $12 for this darn cupcake. I'm going to sit here and eat. So anyway, long story longer, she dumps the cupcake in the floor. Which, even though I'm a germaphobe, I'm like, that was $4 for eating that cupcake. Get in there, I get my ice cream. And so we sit there and we talk about nothing. And it's just great. We're eating all that high-fat food. And we're just thinking, I want her to know that this is how a godly man should treat her. That he takes her to a restaurant, that he pays for her, because he's got a job, and he loves on this girl, and he opens the door for her, and he does not try anything crazy with her. And so I'm looking and reverse engineering, hopefully forward to the day when some little guy comes along, and if he tries to put the moves on her, she's going to kick him into you-know-what. And man, it's just going to bless God. I can just feel it. And so it's just going to be a good thing, because what I'm trying to do with all my heart is to fulfill this biblical responsibility to maintain and fight for the purity of my daughter. So that when some guy tries to get her in the back seat or somewhere else, she just looks at him and goes, no. That's not what a daughter of the King does. That's not what I'm about. And dads, I think primarily it's our responsibility to fight for that for our daughters. Because one of the things that's happened, that's come along, and a lot of this stuff was good, but one of the things that's bad of women being liberated is that the sense of chivalry and protection of women especially has been lost. And so men, we got to fight for it. And we got to raise our daughters to know this is how a godly man should treat you. And we got to raise our sons to know, sons, this is how we're supposed to treat women. We need to honor them. They're special. So the question here, kids, no kids, in between. Do you have a plan working toward protecting the purity of your children? A couple of practical things you can do. There are a lot of proverbs. Your kids, as they get older, they can learn proverbs that speak to the folly of sexuality outside of marriage and speak to the wisdom of keeping it within marriage. Something practical you can do. Here's another thing. Fellas, I think that we've got to listen to. If you have daughters, hear me closely. In all of my years of student ministry and traveling around talking, when I would talk to young women, one of the most primary reasons that they fell sexually throughout their teenage years is because they were looking for affection and love that they did not get from their dad, that they were trying to find in the arms of a boy. And I think we have a responsibility to be able to show them the right amount of affection so that they don't have to look for it elsewhere. Now, the kids have freedom, of course they do. They have their own moral responsibility. But until they begin to exercise that and make decisions on their own, we have got to protect them and provide an environment where boys know how to treat girls and girls know how to act. What's the plan you guys have? Have you even thought about it? Are you praying for the purity of your children? Because that's something I think we've got to deal with. Look, verse 10. This is what we want our daughters to say. I was a wall, and my breasts were like towers, and I was in his eyes as one who finds peace. So what she's saying, hey, you know what? My brothers took care of me. I was responsible on my own. I made it. I was a wall. And so when my husband got me, what were my eyes to him? Peace. Just like we've seen before when she's talked about the dove. Verse 11, kind of like verse 5. I'll go ahead and warn you. Not sure we're going to get this right, but we'll do what we can. Solomon had a vineyard at Baal Hamon. He let out the vineyard to keepers. Each one was to bring for its fruit 1,000 pieces of silver. What seemed to be kind of the preponderance of evidence here is that Solomon probably very likely had a field. And in this culture, typically, if you were a large, wealthy landowner like he was, you'd hire some guys to come in and work it. So what's happening here is either they're having to pay 1,000 to work it, or when they sell it, they're selling their part of the field for 1,000, and then they get 200 shekels here, 200 pieces, as they're cut. So what she's saying here in verse 12, I think explains how this relates. My vineyard, my very own, is before me. You know, from before we talked about this, that refers to her own body. You, O Solomon, may have the 1,000, and the keepers of the fruit 200. So what's probably happening here is she's saying, Solomon, I've kept myself for you, just like these guys kept their vineyard for you. And I want you to know, you're getting the best of it. But if you can, give my brothers some love, maybe a gift. 200 pieces of silver might be a good start. Potentially what some people think that they're saying here, because they helped keep me pure on my way to you. Verse 13. You who dwell in the gardens with companions listening for your voice, let me hear it. This is very difficult to interpret, to figure out exactly who's speaking. I think the ESV's got it right, that it is him. And what I think is happening here, honestly, is he's saying, sweetheart, you've been talking all this sweetness, and Daddy likes it. You better keep it up. And so he is saying to her, I love it. Just keep it coming. And then at verse 14, we see such a fitting end to the book. Make haste, my beloved, and be like a gazelle or a young stag on the mountain of spices. And it's unclear to know here, is this the way she felt before they got together, or is this happening in real time? And she's saying, okay, it's time for round 2 of the make up the marriage festivities. It's unclear, but what we know for sure here is there's a sense of passion and a sense of love that the book ends on. Which I think leads me to the story I just want to close with, because I think it's so good. I've acknowledged just a huge debt to a man named Tommy Nelson throughout the series. He's got a great series on Song of Solomon. And one of the stories that he tells is actually on himself. It's very good. He said he and his wife, they went on a cruise. I don't know if you guys have ever been on a cruise. I haven't yet. Hopefully someday when I'm old and I'm all hunched over. Before I get there, I want to get on the cruise. And it's one of those things you have to like save up for, and it's a huge deal, big shenanigans. And you really want it to go right when you're on the cruise. Well, they get there and things are going good, and he's shaking the captain's hand, and they lose his luggage. And so he's trying to be the good spiritual leader and be the good pastor, Song of Solomon man. And so he and his wife are standing on top of the deck, and they're looking out at the water, and she's just sobbing. She said, "Oh, Tommy, I'm just so upset that they lost our luggage." And he's like, "Well, sweetheart, I know." And he's patting her on the back, and he's saying, "You know, we're going island hopping, so you can just get whatever you need at any of these islands that we stop at." She's like, "I know, but I had a special nightgown in there just for you for this trip." And he stood up real straight like this. He said, "Tell me specifically how it was so that I might know how to pray more effectively." And so they're standing there and they're having this exchange, and suddenly his interest is piqued for obvious reasons, and she begins to describe it. She said, "Well, it was red and silk, and it came down about right here." And he said, "You know, I went to that captain and I said, you need to find my luggage. And if you don't find it, I'm going to kill you and all the crew. So you need to find that luggage." Well, I think what's beautiful about this is the Nelsons, they're getting older now. And to see that even as they move on with their life, that passion and that fervor and that intimate love that they have for one another, it has not waned. And I look at them, and I look at life, and I say, this is what we want. And I hope that's what you've done today. I hope that's what you've done throughout this entire series. That you've looked at this picture, and you've said, that's what I want. How can I get there? And what we want to remember is, we get there through the application of biblical principles. In the power of the Spirit, through the gospel working out in our lives. Because if you just want to go do these on your own, you'll do them for a little while. Until your wife really makes you mad. Until your husband doesn't call. I'm home really late. And then your fire will begin to go out, out, out. But if we make the connection that God has not given us the Christian life to do on our own, but that He has put His Spirit within us through what the gospel has purchased for us, then we can begin to see gospel transformation take place. So every week, that's why we take the table. Not because that's what young churches do who want to experience something, but because we need to see the gospel every week because we forget how good it is in our lives. So as we come to the end of our message, I want you to do two things. I want you to look back over your notes before you take communion today and say, here are the areas where I really need God's help. Here's where I've fallen so short, even this week. And if there's some kind of conversation that needs to be had, even in these moments before communion, and say, sweetheart, I was wrong, I'm sorry, we've got to patch this up, then do that before we take the table. If you're here today, and just like I talked about earlier, you might look at your own sexual sin and say, man, coming in here, I didn't even know it was wrong to be jumping into bed with somebody that wasn't my wife, to be looking at men or women on the internet that I'm not married to. I didn't even know that was wrong. Well, today, the Spirit has begun to speak to you and said, it is wrong, and it's symptomatic of a larger darkness in your heart. Today, don't take the table. You're not ready for it. But respond. Bring the person who brought you. Myself and the other pastors will be in the back. And we can tell you how you can begin to know God. For all of us, let's prepare our hearts for the sacred meal by standing and reading the text together.